Welcome to our webinar, Feel Empowered While Caregiving by Janet Edmunson. My name is Catherine. I am administrator for this webinar. Now, in the past, we have done a drawing for a free CD for someone who attended the webinar. The last webinar winner was Suzanne Sutton of Ontario, Canada. Please note that Janet's books and CDs are available on her website at www.affirmyourself.com, or you can order them from Amazon or your local bookstore. Janet will be presenting the next webinar on Monday, November 20th. The topic is Handling Holiday Stress for Caregivers. You will receive a link to register in the follow-up email that you're going to get tomorrow from us. And even if you can't make it that date, please register anyway, as we will be recording it for you so that you can watch it later at your convenience. One last administrative item. To ask Janet a question, just type it into the questions box, which is in the panel to your right, and then hit send. You can do this at any time during the webinar, and Janet will answer them at the end. Now I'd like to take a minute to introduce Janet. If you've participated in our webinars before, you know that Janet took care of her husband, Charles, during the 5 years that he faced a movement disorder with dementia called cortical basal degeneration, CBD. Janet has a master's degree from Georgia State University, is past chair of the board of directors for Cure PSP, and has over 30 years experience in leadership within the health promotion field. She currently resides in South Portland, Maine. Now here's Janet.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for spending this time with us to get some tips on how to feel empowered while caregiving. Let me start with this quote from Oprah Winfrey. Quote, "When you think about growing and being empowered yourself, it is what you've been able to do for other people that leaves you the fullest," end quote. For you as a caregiver, then this empowerment is a given, because you're providing support and care for your loved one, for that other. So I hope that caregiving does leave you feeling the fullest. Then why do so many of us feel powerless, right? The problem is that feeling powerless when we do feel that way contributes to burnout and depression. And even though we should be feeling empowered from Oprah Winfrey's quote, we aren't always feeling that way. Feeling powerless is an easy trap to fall into as a caregiver. You know, especially if you feel stuck. Maybe it's that you never expected to be in this role. That happens to many of us. Or maybe you just feel helpless in being able to make things better. But no matter what your caregiving circumstance is, you are not totally powerless. Sure, you know, you can't always get enough time, you can't always get enough money, or you can't always get the physical assistance that you like, but you can always get more happiness, and that's going to lead to that empowerment. In this webinar, we'll discuss some ways that you can use your own state of mind to focus on things that you can control and that will help you achieve that happiness and empowerment that you seek. I know you're seeking it or you wouldn't be on this webinar. We want to feel empowered. Ed Deci is a psychology researcher, and he's learned in his studies that there are 3 basic human needs that are listed up here on this slide. There's the need for autonomy, the need for competence, and the need for relatedness. Now, we're going to talk about each one of these in the next slides in more detail, but as an introduction, Deci talks about these as human needs that must be satisfied to give us intrinsic motivation. You know, that's the motivation that comes from within us, that gets us going, that gets us excited. Again, that's going to lead to empowerment. It's kind of like this guy climbing on a snowy mountain. You know, in this case, nobody's telling him he has to do it. He's just doing it because he wants to. Now, none of us really has asked for this illness to befall our loved ones. So we can't really say, like this guy, we're doing this because we want to in the same way. But we can still find and experience this intrinsic motivation and the empowerment that it will bring when we look at autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So let's look at autonomy first. Autonomy is the desire to direct our own lives. While so much is demanded of us as caregivers, and we have many responsibilities in which we have no control over, right? Let's look at where we can have some opportunities to direct our own lives. Impossible? I don't think so. Every day we have numerous chances to make decisions for ourselves. What we want to eat. Yeah, what we want to read. What we want to listen to for music or TV. Who we want to text or call. Trust yourself and your ability to make decisions for yourself. Even when you're solving challenges and problems with your caregiving, you are using your autonomy to determine how to best get through them. So trust yourself for this. Unfortunately, though, when you think about our loved ones' perspective, they can really be challenged in having their own autonomy. In fact, they're losing more and more autonomy as their disease progresses, more than likely. So this can produce frustration on their part. I certainly saw that with Charles, and more stress and effort on our part. And I certainly felt that for myself. So remember that autonomy is also a basic need for your loved ones. So when you think about your loved one's perspective, think about how you can allow them as much autonomy as is possible and safe. So remember, the autonomy is the desire to direct their own lives. So include them in decisions whenever they are capable and allow them to make some of their own decisions so that they are using autonomy as well. Again, it's a basic human need. When you feel like you have no control at all, I'd encourage you to jot down these 4 T's. And you can see there are actually some ways that you can have at least a little autonomy to make your own decisions when you go through each of these T's. Now, these 4 T's come from Daniel Pink's book called Drive. It was written for the business community. But he summarizes and explains much of Ed Dece's research. And I like these 4 T's that come from Ed Dece's research, but were formulated by Daniel Pink. So you can look for opportunities to have autonomy in the task. So the things that you do, what you do. All right, such as whether you choose to do all your housekeeping or hire someone else to do that. That's an example of when you have autonomy over a task. Next is having autonomy over time, when you do it. So maybe you need a little time for yourself first thing in the morning to give you the inner strength for the day. So maybe you get up a bit earlier than your loved one to get that time. Someone in one of my support groups does that. That's the only way for her to get that special quiet time that she needs for her renewal. Another way to take control over your time is to make sure to schedule all doctor appointments in the late morning or early afternoon so you don't get caught in rush hour traffic. So when you're trying to find autonomy and where you can have more autonomy, look at time when you do things. Next is finding autonomy through technique, how you do it. For example, how you cook dinners. So if you enjoy cooking, if that's something that gives you pleasure and you have a passion for it, you may want to make some of your favorite dinners at night and just make that part of your own time and your special time for yourself. But if you're not a cook, like I'm not a cook, like me, you can choose to buy pre-made or frozen items or accept meals from volunteers in your family, friends, or community. So let someone else cook for you. And that's technique, how you do it. And I just use cooking as an example. Could be anything that you need to do. Do you want to outsource it? Do you want to do it yourself? How do you want to get it done? Next is looking for autonomy in the team with whom you do it. For instance, you can have influence in deciding who you want to include on your loved one's care team. So you look at who's caring for your loved one. You can have that influence. Who's going to be on that team? The same token, you can also have autonomy to invite special people to be part of your support network by reaching out to them for advice and moral support, or going to a group that gives you that support. We just had someone in Portland, Maine, where I do my in face-to-face support group. I have someone who just joined this last time, and her husband, who has a dementia disease. And she just said, wow, this is going to be my tribe. So you want to find that network, that tribe that's going to support you through the unique things you're going through. Okay, so that's autonomy. Let's look at competence. What's competence? Well, competence is the desire to get better at things, to get better at things. Remember, this is a basic human need. And this is one that we really, I think, have a lot of opportunities to practice as a caregiver. I'm going to share with you some things that I got to get better at through my caregiving experience. And the first one I will mention is patience. Throughout the entire experience of caring for Charles, I needed to develop patience. For one, everything started to take so much more time. Do you relate to that? You know, as Charles was less able to do things for himself, I had to take on those responsibilities. So providing that assistance. But the hardest part for me to have patience was when Charles started, he had a phase for a few months of just being agitated and angry and frustrated. And it was constant. And he was even yelling, so that was really hard. It took a lot of patience. And it felt so personal. And I'm not still sure whether it was or wasn't personal. But it was hard to not yell back and to not get angry back at him. Well, I had one episode where I lost it and yelled right back in his face. I mostly worked hard to just let it go and let it roll off my back. But it was hard. It was very hard. But for my own sanity, I needed to work at it. I needed to get better at this. So building this competence of patience was feeding, again, a basic human need for me to get competent in that. And that in turn gives me a feeling of empowerment versus feeling powerless. Let me share another one. So another thing that I got better at was asking questions, not giving solutions. So the way my brain works is that if you come to me with a problem, my brain is already coming up with solutions and options. Whether you want them or not, I'm ready to give them to you. And sometimes I just do. And I was doing that with Charles. This was, I can remember just, we were taking a walk, and I can remember the conversation clear as day, fairly early in his disease. He'd come home from work, and he was starting to get more and more frustrated at work, I think because he was recognizing some of his issues physically there and mentally there, cognitively there, as well as the things that were just the daily things that were happening at his workplace. So he'd come home, and I remember walking down the street, and he was sharing them with me. And of course, my brain is already coming up with solutions. I think he was sharing some conversation he had with someone and the difficulty of it, etc. Well, he finally told me, I don't want your solutions. Just listen to me and sympathize with me. And you know, I know that's what people want. But again, I have to get more competent and master this holding back on just needing to give my solutions. So that's something that, not always successfully, I really worked on trying to do, especially after he brought it to my attention at that point. So working on that, again, is a way to feel a little empowerment, because I'm not just floating and doing something that's not being helpful. Another thing that I got better at is not having to do it all. My natural tendency, and I bet this is many of you, is to be right there to provide help and care. I probably lean toward the over-caring side of things. So I was also young. I was in my 40s when Charles was going through his disease. He was in his late 40s. And I thought, I can do it all, even though I was working full-time, and initially he was as well. But what I learned to get better at was not having to do it all. So as an example, this is just one example where I was able to let someone else help me. These are pictures of my family helping to do some of the range of motion exercises that Charles did every morning and every evening. So whenever they visited, I taught them how to do it, and they all worked to do it, so I didn't have to do it at that point. So that's just one example. There were many others where I used other people, especially for the cooking and such, to help me get through it all. So getting others involved in helping Charles contributed my sense of building competence, which again was also empowering, not having to do it all and getting better at asking and accepting help when people offered it. There's a skill to that. You've got to practice that. Many of us are not good at that at all. So see that as something that we practice to get competence toward it, to give us more empowerment. Another thing I got better at was enjoying the moment. Basically to stop and smell the roses. So I have some special moments of smelling the roses pictured here. In the top photo, we worked with our local Borders bookstore to have a book signing for Charles's newly published book. It's called Paradoxes of Leadership. And while having this successful event to promote his book, I was able to totally appreciate the moment and how impactful it was for Charles, who at the time, as you can see, was very far in the devastation of his disease. But it was very clear, I can't quite see it in this picture, but very clear during the whole kind of ceremony and celebration that we had at that time, that it was very impactful on his spirit. The picture on the left was one of us early in the disease when we were visiting family in Atlanta, and we went to the 1996 Olympics. So we had tons of fun and special moments there, and just absorbing those moments and knowing that, how often do you get to go to the Olympics? And to do this with someone that you knew had a progressive disease, being in the moment was really helpful for me and something I really was trying to get better at. The reason I say I was trying to get better at it is I was a workaholic. I worked a lot, and I just zoom through life. Now I wanted to stop and experience these events with Charles. And then the picture at the bottom right, these are just the day-to-day activities that we had. Just taking a walk in the neighborhood with Charles produced moments to absorb and savor. So as I said, prior to Charles's disease, I just seemed to rush through life. Now, though, I was getting better at enjoying the special moments because I now knew that these moments with Charles were limited and would soon come to an end. I know we hate to think that, but this is the case. So enjoying the moment is really an empowerment that we get in a very unique way. The last example of something that I got better at was not being a workaholic. I already alluded to the fact that I am, right? Charles and I both loved our jobs, and we found meaning in them. We work long hours. Even on weekends, we'd often go, like I would go with him to his workplace and I do my work, or vice versa. And we do that on the weekends because we loved what we were doing. We're excited about what we were accomplishing. But when the disease finally forced Charles to retire and be at home all day, I needed to learn to curb some of my workaholic tendencies and get home. So that meant I needed to start coming home in a decent time at the end of the workday. And that required that I learned to get better at delegating some of my work tasks to others at work so I could stick to the 40-hour work week. I don't think I had done a 40-hour work week ever in my life prior to that point. In retrospect, I found that this not only helped me, but it also allowed my staff to grow as they got to take on new tasks. So it was a good thing. So getting competent at this was empowering for me, for them, for Charles. I now had more quality time with Charles while his days were numbered. Speaking of numbers, now it's your turn to think about what you're going to get better at through this caregiving experience. And I'd like you to take a piece of paper. If you don't have one now, get one as soon as we're done. And jot down 2 or 3 or 4 things that you see that you are getting better at and working on, or that maybe you're not, and this is the time to say, I want to get more competence because that's going to make me feel more empowered. So there's always something to get better at. It might be learning patience like I described. Maybe it's tamping down unnecessary guilt. Maybe it's learning to handle the finances if that was something that your loved one did, that now you have to do. Or maybe it's learning more about how your insurance and Medicare works. And even something that I think many of us can get better at is getting more savvy in the medical environment by really preparing for our doctor visits and having all the questions ready for those visits. So those are just some of the things that came to the top of my head as I think about you and what you might want to get better at. But there are innumerable things you could put on your list. So instead of looking at the things you need to get better at as a chore, look at them as an opportunity for developing your own competence and your internal motivation. So again, I hope you'll take time to jot down 3 or 4 things that you're getting better at through this experience of caregiving. Hopefully, by recognizing them instead of dreading them, you'll begin to see how empowering they actually can be. Now, the third and the final basic human need, we've got more content after this, but the final of the 3 basic human needs from DC's research on developing intrinsic motivation and the empowerment it can give is relatedness. If you've ever heard me talk, I talk a lot about the importance of relationships. So when you think about it in relation to empowerment, friends and family can be a tremendous catalyst to empower us. They can give us positive energy and encouragement that empowers us. So the top picture on the left is part of my greater family who were there for me in ways I never knew I even needed. The picture at the top right is my longtime friend Jean, who kept me laughing throughout this experience and kept me in a more positive mindset. The bottom left is a picture of people from the trade association that Charles was very involved in. They supported Charles in many ways, which gave him a close-knit community outside of family and friends. That relatedness, that group of people you're looking at right there, were hugely important to Charles's sense of meaning and well-being. And then the picture on the bottom right is Charles with his next younger brother and his family, not his full family, but they started doing foster care and adopting a bunch of kids. So this is like their second family. And Charles has 2 brothers, this one David and another one Ken, who became very involved, even from afar, because they did not live near us through Charles's health challenges. And the brothers had not been very close for the 10 to 15 years prior to this. So this was kind of special and a very important part of relatedness. So it's easier to feel empowered when we have supported people around us. So invest in the relationships that energize you. So I get it. While caregiving, you have less time for the relationships in your life. You know, that's definitely a given. So that's why you want to invest in the ones that energize you and are like electricians who light you up. So another task you can do when we're done today is to make a list of the people who give you the emotional support you need. Who are the genes and the special family in your life that support you? While you might not have as much time as you like with them, just make a little time. Give them a call, invite them for dinner every now and then. Go for a walk with them. Fit them into your life however you can, but don't let them drop off the face of the map for you during this time. Don't let this experience of caregiving isolate you from these people, because the emotional power from these connections can be extremely powerful and energizing. Now, let's finish by looking at 5 tips to focus on in order to feel empowered in your caregiving experience and allow you to soar in spite of the tremendous challenges and emotional drains. I modified this information from an article called Finding Ways to Feel Empowered in helpguide.org, and also an article by Barry J. Jacobs on an AARP website. So let's look at the tips that they gave us. Despite any resentments or burdens that you feel, acknowledge that you have made a conscious decision, a choice, to provide care for your loved one. You might feel like you just kind of had to be in this position, but in some ways, you really are making a choice to do this. So that's you, actually in doing that, you've used one of your basic human needs of autonomy. Also, as you embrace that choice to feel empowered, focus on the positive reasons behind it. These will be individual to your particular situation and the relationship you have with your loved one. Some of you had really great relationships with your loved one. Some of you maybe not so great. So you've got to personalize your positive reasons for giving care. But I want to give you some ideas about what these positive reasons could look like. One positive reason could be something like an opportunity to give back to your loved one for all that they've meant to you over the years. Another positive reason might be to show how dearly and deeply you love them. Yet another positive reason might be that you know that your loved one would do this for you, so you want to do it for them. Another positive reason might be, if you are caring for a spouse, that it fully expresses your commitment to your marriage vows. Another positive reason might be that it reflects your values. Another positive reason might be that you want to provide an example for your children and grandchildren by the care that you're giving. And finally, if you're caring for a parent, your positive reason might be that you want to repay your parent for the care that they gave you in your growing up. So take just a moment to think about what your positive reason is for the choice that you made to care for your loved one. And this is a good way to do it. Answer this question. I provide care because, and then jot down a positive reason, all right? Not the have to reasons, but a positive reason or reasons. So think about it. I provide care because blank, blank, blank. These deep and meaningful motivations can help sustain you, especially through the difficult times that will come. We won't be able to control some of the discouraging aspects of caring for a loved one, like getting bad news from the doctor or not getting the help we deserve from other family members. But we can start to look for and celebrate the small victories. That's what this tip is. One that I remember so clearly is during a time later in Charles's disease progression when he struggled to have a bowel movement. Almost every afternoon, he'd start to groan. We worked with hospice to get control of this. And with a daily regimen of suppositories, Colace, and a liquid drug called lactulose, we finally started to have some success. So I would be donning my latex gloves as I'm cleaning him up, and I would be cheering. In fact, I remember when my mom visited, she heard me cheering and said, "What are you doing?" I've never heard anyone cheering for someone who's having a bowel movement. But let me tell you, this was a small victory. Every time we were thrilled to have that. And anyone who's gone through constipation knows that feeling. Other examples of small victories could be something like you find 15 minutes just for yourself. Or another small victory might be, your loved one said, "I love you," or "thank you." Maybe a small victory is that the aide shows up on time. Or another small victory might be that the wait in the doctor's office was only a few minutes. My goodness, you sat down and all of a sudden they were ready to see you. Or another example of a small victory would be you go to your favorite lunch place and they have that special sandwich that you love so much. I bet you can think of a small victory you had today or earlier this week. Put your antennas up to start noticing them. And once you do, celebrate them, cheer for them, right? And that will make you feel more empowered in your caregiving. So celebrate the small victories. Next tip is to be productive. However, just know there's a difference between being busy and being productive. Let's think about that for a moment. In order to be productive, you need to make sure you have ways to recharge yourself. Otherwise, you'll get less done in the long term. Getting a break, even a small 10-minute one outside in the garage, which is what some of my caregivers have done, or in the bathroom, can help you feel more energetic and focused. One way to distinguish between what is just busyness versus productive is to ask yourself, is this task or activity purposeful? Think about that. Things that you do, is everything that you do, is it purposeful? So what is adding to your happiness, to your loved one's care, or to another important purpose? When you notice things that you're spending time on, but which are not purposeful, those are the ones you want to delegate, postpone, or just stop doing them altogether. So get this mindset to keep asking, is this purposeful? Focus on meaningful and purposeful tasks. By doing that, you can truly help yourself feel more empowered instead of frazzled and depleted. I encourage you to occasionally remind yourself of what your loved one, if well, would be saying. All right, in regard to that yourself. Okay, so now let's go on to this next one. Oftentimes as caregivers, we are not getting the appreciation and thank yous that we deserve for the sacrifice of time and effort we've dedicated to our loved one's care. Under the current circumstances, it might not be realistic to even expect it. As Charles's neurological degeneration continued, I am not even sure he was capable of saying thank you, of having any empathy for what I was going through. So flip that around in your own mind to imagine how your loved one would feel about the care you are giving him or her if they were at their best selves without this disease. So just imagine, what would they be saying to you if they could see you doing these things? How would they be showing their appreciation? So when Charles was well, so if I was imagining this, when he was well, he was very complimentary to me. Almost every night, he told me that I was the best thing that ever happened to him. So remembering and hearing him say that in my mind can help uplift me now, which can then help me feel more empowered. And since I know he felt that way toward me before I was doing the caregiving, if he was looking back now at the caregiving that I gave, I'm sure he would have even much more beautiful words to say about me. So I encourage you to occasionally remind yourself of what your loved one, if well, would be saying to you in thanks for all you do. Hold on to this imaginary appreciation. Let it encourage and uplift you, especially at times that you need that appreciation. Because you're going to have times where you really feel like, I'm not getting any love here, right? That's when you need to do this imaginary process. Finally, our last tip, applaud your own efforts. No one can get in the way of you using this tip. Remind yourself of the good that you are doing. Make a list of the ways that your caregiving is making a positive difference. So as I think of the positive difference my caregiving made to Charles's quality of life, here are some things that come to mind. And as I say these, I'm not saying them to boast, I'm just saying them to try to jog your mind as to what are some of the things that you could applaud yourself for. Maybe these will help you remember the ways that you made a difference. So I made a difference with Charles. Charles was passionate to stay on his jogging regimen, which was his daily personal victory. So for as long as it was physically possible, I helped him keep jogging by running with him, holding his arm. I made a difference when I took him every day to get the frozen yogurt that he looked forward to. I made a difference when I found a driver for him to take him to work and also manage getting him aides at work so he could continue the job that he loved so much for as long as possible. He wanted to work for as long as was humanly possible for him. I think another way that I made a difference was creating a symptom list with him prior to all of his doctor visits, so those appointments were more effective. I made a difference by keeping him going to events that he didn't want to miss. For instance, I traveled with him to board meetings for his beloved trade organization. And I made a difference by helping him coordinate help to make sure his book got written, edited, and published, especially as his disease progressed and he had no ability to even type and eventually to talk. So while your list will be very different than mine, I'm sure it'll be just as meaningful. Once you create your list, refer back to it and applaud yourself when you need an emotional boost. And keep adding to it as you recognize other ways and efforts that you're doing for your loved one's care that's making a difference. Even if it's making a difference not only in your loved one, but in other people's lives, like your grandkids or your friends. And don't only acknowledge your efforts, reward yourself every now and then too. Now, I ask you to pick at least one of the tips I mentioned today and tonight to try. Make that your action plan for this webinar, and then make a ritual out of what you decide to do, and do it regularly. Now, before I give you my final quote, I'd like to turn it back to Catherine to look at your comments and take any of your questions. Catherine?
All right, so as a quick reminder to send us a question, please type them into the questions box, which you will find in the right-hand panel, and then hit send. All right, so the first question we have today, I hate the things I have to get better at. How is that empowerment?
Yeah, that is a good question. So getting better at things doesn't mean that we're always going to love the things that we're getting better at. In fact, they're kind of hard. Like patience as an example. It's hard. It's hard work. So, and uncomfortable. But knowing that you are learning and getting competent in something difficult for you could be a message to yourself that you are stronger than you think and more capable than you might have realized. We don't necessarily have to like it, but we can be proud of ourselves for developing these skills. So maybe sort of change how you look at things. Yeah, there are things we hate, but just flipping, that's what I'm hoping from this webinar, if you flip the way you look at things, that things that were a chore or something that you drug yourself through, now you see as really ways for empowerment. Catherine?
If there's any other questions, I'll give just a second for anyone to type them in before we wrap up the webinar tonight. All right, we did get another question come in here. What about deciding on moist? Does that subject have to be revisited?
I'm not sure what that means. Moist? M-O-I-S-T? Deciding on maybe the spell checker typed something wrong there, Catherine, do you think?
Possibly, or molst, M-O-L-S-T. Does that make more sense?
I'm not sure what that is either.
Okay. Linda, do you have a better description of what M-O-L-S-T is, most? Let's see. Deciding on death decisions, sorry.
Oh, okay. So now read the whole sentence to me.
Okay.
Catherine.
So what about deciding on death decisions? Does this subject have to be revisited?
What about deciding on death decisions has to be revisited? Are we talking about empowerment, feeling empowered? So let's just let me just think this through. So when you're deciding on desk decisions, you might be deciding on whether, I guess you could say a couple of things, whether you want to have hospice help you or not. And certainly that's empowering, making those decisions, deciding whether you want to be cremated or not. I think actually thinking that through, if I'm understanding the question, but the way I'm interpreting it, it's very empowering if we can make our own decisions or work with our loved one to make their decisions on our death wants and desires and care and all of that. So I'm not sure if I'm getting to that because I'm not familiar with the word most, but that's what comes to me, and I think that's very empowering. Something that seems so yucky, you know, like, ooh, I don't want to do that, can actually be empowering. I felt like it was when we did that with Charles. I worked with his brothers to come up with a plan of what we were going to do and how we were going to handle the healthcare proxy and not having extraordinary measures, et cetera, and working that through with Charles not being able to, at this point, say much, but his brothers sharing their thoughts and ideas. I think it really was empowering and actually a great connection for all of us, and I felt very good about the decisions we made, and I felt like I had the support. That's empowering, I think. Anything else, Catherine?
Well, we had just a brief add-on sort of to that question that the word could actually be POLST, which is physician's orders on life-saving treatments. And so I don't know if that changes any of your answer, possibly.
No, I think actually that, it's really the same. It's trying to decide really your end-of-life decisions in regard to extraordinary care or comfort care and that sort of thing. And I think, again, all of those decisions are very empowering. So don't, it's one of those things that's very hard to bring up. I could not initially bring that up with Charles, mainly because Charles was young and certainly we didn't think at first this was going to be something they was going to die from, but obviously it was. And we never had that conversation about, well, what are we going to do at that point when you feeding tube and all the different questions. And he got at a point where he was just lashing out. Oh, you're just going to put me in a nursing home. Oh, and all of his fears were coming out. And with that, I couldn't bring this up. I couldn't. So I'm one of the last ones to have brought it up. But I used the opportunity when his brothers were visiting to have the conversation and make this happen. And again, that was such a relief, and it was very empowering. Catherine?
We did get another question come in, and it's how do you handle the frustration? It doesn't specify which side of frustration, the caretaker or the patient, but I'm sure you can speak to both.
Yes, yeah. Well, we know that our loved ones are going through frustration, and that what's happening oftentimes is their frustration is being taken out on us. We're the closest person to them. They may not take that frustration out on the kids. They may not take that frustration out on other family members or friends or acquaintances. You're the bad guy. You're the one that gets the brunt of it. And I certainly had Charles's frustration coming at me. And then there's the frustration that you just have in general, a frustration that things take longer, the frustration. It can be the simplest frustration. I remember we had so much urine issues, incontinent issues. I remember taking Charles to the movie theater. He loved to go to the movies, and having to go into, thank goodness, this particular movie theater had one of those family bathrooms, and I used to use I didn't have a urinal, I used to use a little solo cup for Charles when he had to pee. And I put the cup up on the sink, and I was pulling Charles's pants up, and I knocked the cup over, and that urine went everywhere in that bathroom. That's just one example of the frustrations that happen day in and day out for many of you, right? So with those frustrations, the thing that I think we have to think about is, can I find a positive point, a positive outlook on this, a positive way of looking at this? because the frustrations are just going to happen, and we're going to get frustrated. We can't stop that emotion. It's automatic. But once we get through that initial emotion, we can stop and use our brain, the thinking and reframing part of our brain, to say, all right, that's frustrating, but what can be a positive response to this? What can be a positive thing about this? And maybe it's simply that I'm learning patience. But maybe it's something else. Another kind of frustration might be leading to a better relationship, or might be leading to a better understanding, or some other aspect of growth, of your own personal growth. So just stopping and asking ourselves, what is a position, I think, is a way to get to the other side. And then that's empowerment. Using that question when you're feeling frustrated to get to a positive answer to it is empowering for sure. These have been great questions. Thank you so much. Are there any others, Catherine?
We did have a little bit of a follow-up on that frustration one. It is that her husband is frustrated because he can't communicate well, and he lashes out. She obviously is dealing with that, and he's frustrated with himself. So if you have anything to speak about that, and then we have one last question before we'll close out.
Yeah, no, definitely. That is exactly what happened in my situation. And it did happen, especially, and so it's probably really connected to that lack of being able to communicate. When Charles's speech got slurry and you couldn't understand him, it's frustrating for him. And if there's a neurological disease, which isn't always the case, but if there is, chances are he doesn't have the insight to realize that we're not understanding, or to him, he is speaking just as clearly as day, but his brain is messing it up and it's coming out slurred and garbly. So I think in some ways, especially initially, Charles didn't even realize that he wasn't speaking clearly, and that it was gobbledygook. He didn't realize that. So total frustration. So how do you deal with that? Sometimes you have to walk away. One time I yelled back at him, as I mentioned, but typically you need to get a little distance, find a little space, and talk to yourself, take some deep breaths, and say to yourself, this is a mantra especially the Alzheimer's community uses, is be mad at the disease, not at your loved one. So you change who you're mad at. You're mad at that third person in the room, the disease. And just change the focus, I think can help. And I wish there were ways that we had that you could help reduce your loved one's frustration, but oftentimes there aren't answers for this lack of communication. And but I would say on a practical note, work with a speech therapist on communication boards, communication techniques, ways that you can at least get to what they want. My husband's disease was such that he couldn't even do thumbs up or thumbs down for yes or no answers. So there was total frustration. We had to just keep guessing until we got it right. And in that case, you just have to keep being, you just have to try not to get frustrated yourself, because that just angsts them up. So that's what I would say in answer to that one. Catherine?
All right, so our last question for the night. Do you have any tips on how to provide a safe environment while allowing your loved one freedom of activities?
Well, that is always the balance in your thought process. Because remember, the autonomy is people want to direct their own lives. So there's not a hard and fast rule, you do this, you don't do that. But you have to evaluate what is a matter of real safety versus what's a matter of just your preference. So if you're going to clamp down on things that are safety-wise, like, no, you can't get up and walk over there, I've got to be with you, or you've got to use your walker, or you're going to use a wheelchair, versus what would you like to watch on TV? Do you want to watch The Voice, or do you want to watch CNN? So thinking about as many ways as you can give them choices. And maybe those choices are in some of the smaller parts of life, but really giving them choices, offering them choices when you can, so that when you are the bad guy and holding on to being firm on some of the safety things, it's at least balanced with enough of the autonomy stuff that they don't feel like someone's totally controlling their lives. And it's not an easy answer. And I encourage you to go on the Alzheimer's website and look at some of the things that they talk about in with regard to this this very issue. There are a lot of resources out there for that. Catherine, shall we wrap up?
All right. So yeah, that's all the time we have for questions tonight. I wanted to remind you that Janet will be presenting her next webinar on Monday, November 20th. The topic is handling holiday stress while caregiving. You can watch for the link to register in your follow-up email that you're going to get after this webinar is over. As I mentioned earlier, Janet's products are available on her website at www.affirmyourself.com or from Amazon or your local bookstore.
All right, let me finish with my final quote. Thank you, Catherine, for helping so much with this, with the process here of our webinar today. So here is a quote I want to leave with from Gary Zukav. He's an American author. Quote, "The characteristics of an authentically empowered personality are humbleness, clarity, forgiveness, and love." End quote. I love those words. So thank you all for attending today. Thank you, Catherine, also for helping me today. And feel free to contact me at janet@affirmyourself.com. And I hope you'll join me for the next webinar, and then we'll have some more in 2018, and I look forward to you joining with me again. Until then, take care, and I wish you many opportunities to feel empowered. Good night.